Welcome to episode 68 of The Liz McMullen Show. I have a very special guest on this evening. Her name is Catherine Friend, and I'm absolutely obsessed with two of her novels. And I was most excited to find out that she's willing to sit down and have a chat with me. So I want to welcome you on the show. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
So my obsession is the Spanish Pearl. Spanish Pearl is, it touches on so many things that I enjoy. I love historical fiction. I'm not huge into science fiction, but I do love the tumble back in time concept. And the other thing that I think is groovy is when there are characters, women, who pass as men, whether they're lesbians or not, whatever their motivations is. That always fascinates me. I was like, how do they get away with it?
Yeah, well, the book has all of those things. But I can't actually take credit for that idea because years ago I read this book by Diana Gabaldon called Outlander.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the first one to actually sort of mush all these genres together, and I'd never seen that done before. She's got time travel, she's got romance, she's got adventure, she's got historical fiction, and I read that book and I was so excited. I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to do it with a lesbian, and that's kind of where the Spanish Pearl came from. Is I was inspired by the Outlander series.
Amazing. I've never heard of the series before, and I'm sure some of my listeners are like, going online and looking for it.
It's a woman who falls back in time into Scotland. And I didn't know anything about Scotland. I didn't want to copy the book. I wanted to write my own book, so I chose Spain.
Yeah, there's always, well, when you're writing in a particular genre, there's always the concern that you will, not as imitation as a form of flattery, but you have to be careful that to not assimilate things from, that's a nice way for plagiarism. No, but it's, there are what do they call them? Tropes. There are certain things that you expect from a particular story or storyline. And I think the reason why I was fascinated with yours was not only that it went back into time, but it went back into a time that I've never really considered before, which is the 11th century Spain.
Nobody knows about that time period. Oddly enough, it's one of my favorite time periods because I learned about it when I was getting my degree in Spanish, and so they make you learn about Spanish history. And the time period is so full of sort of built-in conflict. It's a perfect place to set a novel because so much goes wrong that all I had to do was just use history as my structure and plug in some made-up characters.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly complicated time where, like, the Christians are fighting against the Moors, and then there are mercenaries. And one of the things that exasperated the main character, Kate, so much is like, can you just tell me who the good guys are and who the bad guys are? This is just too confusing.
She's kind of a black and white person, and that was not a black and white time, that's for sure.
Mm-mm. What I find fascinating, because you have two, a continuation. The second one is the Crown of Valencia, and what's interesting is that for somebody like myself, I love world religions and world history, especially ancient history, and the richness of what happened in North Africa, from Egypt or ancient Sumeria and what is like modern day Iraq, and all the different advances that Moor society had, like from running water to sewage systems to advanced mathematics and education and understanding of health and whatnot. And then you had the juxtaposition in your book where you have the Christian soldiers were like, an unwashed body is
yeah,
it's a sign of holiness, which is one of the reasons why Lewis could pass, because nobody would see her undressed.
I had a lot of fun putting Kate back in that time period and being sort of stunned by what she saw. That was really fun to play with that.
Plus, one of the things that people touch upon when they're reading historical fiction or thinking about particular time periods, they're like, oh, the olfactory assault that you will go through if you're walking through these times, it'll be awful and, not nearly as romantic as the paintings and other things that they find. And there was that, but she also discovered that there were sounds and scents and things that were about this part of history and this part of Europe that really touched her.
Mm-hmm. That creates the conflict, the tension. Does she want to stay? Does she need to go? That was part of her problem that she had to figure out.
Yeah, there was another reader who had a hard time buying into the fact that after finding love with Lewis, that she would be willing to go back to the future to raise Arturo, and had ended up putting them both in grave danger, and some awful things happened to Lewis. And she's like, I don't believe it. But there was something. There's something primal about the connection between, what your growing up life was like. And she had absentee parents, Kate. And so she didn't want to let down this kid, who is in an orphanage, and he's not a baby. He's grown. I don't remember if he's like 5, 6, something.
5, yeah.
So like the older a child gets, the harder it is to get them adopted out. And she had connected more with him and wanted to return more to him than to her wife.
Mm-hmm.
And
I didn't know that was going to happen until the end. So once I got to the end and I realized she has to have a really compelling reason to push her all the way through the book to want to go back to the future.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of developed that as I went, and then I had to go back and make it more clear. So it's a long process.
I know you have a very long novel, and I could see how that's a challenge. But what I liked was how subtly you wove in the comparison between what life was like with Anna, or could have been with Anna as co-parents, as opposed to the way Lewis and Liana looked at things. And
good. I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, one of the clearer things was Tiani and Hazim were playing, and Tiani leaned too far in, I guess she was trying to get at something with a stick, and she fell in the water, and she could have drowned. And Kate was beating herself like, oh, I'm not meant to be around children. She fell. She almost died. I'm terrible with kids. And Lewis is like, well, children have to learn. And then Liana's like, what did you learn? That I can swim. No. So it's just like, it showed me that I would stay in Spain to be with Lewis because he's so much nicer to her and has more respect and admiration for her. And Anna just seems to be so focused on Kate's weaknesses.
And that's really a balancing act, because when you start a novel and you've got a couple that's together, you want them to be together, you want them to like each other. And then I sort of had to gradually reveal that maybe this wasn't the healthiest relationship in the world.
Well, I can't remember the name of Kate's friend, but I think she described the way Anna was treating her was like sawing down a tree with a nail file, that it's subtle, but she was cutting you down, and eventually, she's just not good for you. Mm-hmm. I was like, huh. Because one of the harder things, I know this happens with lesbians more, is when things don't totally suck, people stay in relationships.
Yes.
If there's no big argument or no crystallizing event, as if it's book, but if it's just but it's not bad and it's not good, it's not either way, and then people will coast through relationships for years.
Yeah, but Kate had this life-altering experience by falling back in time, mm-hmm. 9 years, and that was enough to sort of rattle her and make her pay attention.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about the tension about her wanting to go back, and there's actually a scene that I sprung on you today that I wanted you to do a reading of, and it shows how deep her connection with Arturo is, and how committed she is to going back to him, but also how conflicted she is as well.
Okay, do you want me to read that?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is actually toward the end of the Spanish Pearl, and if listeners haven't picked up, it's kind of a spoiler, but Kate falls in love with a soldier who turns out to be a woman. In 11th century Spain, women couldn't really dress as men and pass themselves off as women. It just wasn't done. If you got caught, you were killed. So I had to put Louise in a situation where she stayed a man because it would be too dangerous if anybody knew. And Kate, of course, finds out. And Kate gets into all sorts of trouble. She's always having to be rescued. And this is just after another time that Louise has rescued her, and they've had a big fight. The sky had just begun to lighten, a pale blue free of clouds, when I woke up, inhaling wet grass, warm horses, and a sweet blooming tree off to my left. My mind spun with thoughts of Elena, of Louise, and Elena is Louise's real name. How was I supposed to think of her? As Elena? As Louise? Louise felt more normal, but she told me her name, and I wanted to use it. I sat up, stretched my arms to soak in the freedom. I started, however, at the sight of Elena sitting in the dawn's shadow below a cork tree, watching me. Her drawn face was blank and cold, sending shivers down my arms. "Good morning," I said. She nodded, eyes hooded. "Hamara and Aisha, are they still asleep?" Elena stretched out her long legs. "No, they have left." "What?" I scrambled to my feet, relieved I could stand. Only Matamoros and Rosinante, our 2 horses, grazed the moist grass in the clearing. "If they return to Zaragoza, Mustain will send Aisha back to Ahib." I brushed dirt and grass from my skirts. "Where have they gone?" Elena clenched her jaw. "South to Cordoba. But why do you ask? So you can follow them and leave me again?" I ignored the dig and shook out my blankets, concentrating on rolling them tightly so I wouldn't have to meet Elena's steady gaze. "Because I care about them, that's why." Her guffaw was raw and cruel. "Oh, so you do care about some people." My pulse raced as I turned to face her. "Louise, of course I care. I care very deeply. But sometimes circumstances lead... I just had to. Just accept that." Elena leapt to her feet, face incredulous. "Accept that? Do you have any idea what I've been through?" "You?" Blood boiling now, I flung down the bedroll hard enough it unfurled. Then I jammed my fists into my hips and squared off with my furious lover. "How about what I've been through? I saw Grimaldi murdered. I spent days starving in a dungeon." Elena waved her hand contemptuously. "Nothing compared to... Nothing?" My voice rose to a shriek. I had hurt her terribly, but she had no right to do this. She closed the distance between us in 2 strides and grabbed my arms in her vice-like grip. "You left me, Kate. I survived Albarracin, yet I came back, and you were gone. Look, I'm sorry I hurt you." "Hurt me? Why would it hurt me to have the woman I married leave without saying a word? The woman I exchanged vows with, promised to honor and protect my entire life." I struggled, but her fingers only gripped me tighter. "I can't tell you my reasons, but I had to go. We are married. You can tell me anything." "Elena, we are both women. Call me that again, and I will cut off your tongue. You endanger my life with your carelessness calling me that name." I was almost too angry to admit she was right, but she was. So I forced myself to see her just as Louise. "Look, Louise, we can't be married. We went through that ceremony to save our necks." Louise jerked me close, eyes blazing, and even through my fury I registered how beautiful and terrifying she was, her face only inches from mine. "That is not why I married you." I tried pulling back. "No, Louise, don't." Her icy eyes bore into me. "I married you because, from the moment I saw you at Mirabueno, half-dressed, spitting nails, bringing my best soldier to his knees, my heart was no longer my own." I tried to cover my ears. "Louise, we can't. God ripped my heart from my chest and put it in your pocket." She shook me again, lips thin with anger, but her eyes suddenly lost their chill. "I love you, Kate. That is why I married you." I struggled to breathe. We couldn't be saying these things. They could not be taken back. Tears blurred my vision, and I stomped my feet, breaking free. Just because we love each other doesn't mean we get what we want. There is more at stake here. She clutched my hand, eyes wide. "You love me too?" I whipped my arm free, my voice frantic. "Of course I love you. I can't stand to be apart from you. I hate it when I make you angry, which happens a lot. You make me feel..." My voice cracked, and I stopped. But none of that matters because I can't stay. This time she grabbed me by the shoulders and pinned me against the massive tree trunk, shaking me so hard my brain rattled. You ripped me wide open, showing me what it means to be loved by a woman, what it means to love as a woman, and you cannot stay? The raw pain on her face shot through me, and I suddenly saw, with blinding white clarity, what it had cost Louise to let down her guard and become Elena in my arms. No, I can't stay. We can't be. With a deep growl of pain, Louise pulled me to her, our hearts hammering against one another. We belong together, you and I. We are like two trees entwined. We show our strengths to the world, our weaknesses to each other. My knees gave way at her words, and I sank against her chest. I am strong, she said, and I can fight and hunt. You cannot even catch a rabbit. She held my trembling body close, murmuring next to my ear, Yet you have strengths I could never hope to possess. I felt my resolve melting as she stroked my back, nuzzling my neck with her now soft mouth. Give in, my body breathed. Stay here forever, the trees whispered. You love her. You love this country. The air, the trees, the light, the color, the people. Stay. No, I shoved myself back. I must go.
I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but this is a very romantic book. I'm such a girl. I'm like,
I know. I felt like a girl when I was writing it. But, I was writing it for myself, just for myself, and for Melissa, my wife. It was just to entertain us. I wasn't writing for anybody else. So it still amazes me that other people like yourself get so much enjoyment out of it, because I wasn't even thinking of that. I was just writing it to have fun.
It's made such an impact on me, and I'm very passionate about history. And when I was younger, when I was 19, I went backpacking around Europe, and I did go to Spain. I went to Barcelona and Madrid, and there's something about Europe in general, and it's the layers of history, and then it's not just the buildings, but it's the landscape, and it's so vivid. And one of the things that, I guess, because what you wrote, even though it's not intentional, you're like an English teacher's dream, because there are so many layers of what's happening. And one of the ways that you let your readers know that we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto, is when you're talking about like the colors and how vivid everything is without pollution. And then all the sounds that you would normally hear, like honking horns, or having buildings or telephone lines or electricity and whatnot, and it's all missing. And she's like, and then there are things that they add up that OSHA would never approve of.
Yeah, the silence. I tried to imagine what it would be like to live in a time when you could actually find silence. Mm-hmm. You can't find that anymore.
No. And so funny is I took this critical social thought class in college, and we were talking about how the concept of freedom, and in a time where people could be like stretched on the rack or tortured or hung in town square, and we all look at those times like, oh, how primitive they are. And she said, but the thing is, like, we are so monitored in our current society that even though we see ourselves as having freedoms, we have less. And then I realized, especially, thank God this didn't happen when I was a teenager, but with cell phones and video phones, every misdeed, everything that you've done wrong as a teenager in college or whatever, it's not only captured on video and film, it's all over the internet. And like, even though there are things about that time in 11th century that you're somewhat backward in terms of feminist philosophy and whatnot, there also is so much more freedom, and it's almost as if Kate could finally breathe in that environment much more so than modernity. So I dig her. And the other thing, what you said when you were writing The Spanish Pearl, that you hadn't intended to share it with all of us lesbic lovers. But what about The Crown of Valencia?
Well, I wrote both of those sort of as an escape. My wife and I just started a farm, and I was so exhausted, so I needed to get my brain somewhere else. And this was like 1999, 2000. There weren't many publishing options for lesbian fiction. There were a few, but my novels were way too long. They were way over the word count limits. So I just literally wrote them for myself. I was going to do a trilogy, so I did the first one, and then I started planning the second and the third one. And in the middle of the second one, I realized I don't have enough for 3 books, and I hate it when people write trilogies and the middle one is just kind of filler to get to the third book. And so I decided to just do 2 books, and I was still just writing for myself and Melissa. And then I put them away for years. I put them in my drawer, and every 4 or 5 years I'd get them out and read them and go, oh, this is kind of interesting. So it took me years to actually submit them anywhere.
Yeah, and you're right about the trilogy, and there's this one series that I loved the first book, adored it, and then I decided to have the author on my show, and she had written, I think, 2 or 3 other books in the same series, and I read all of them, and I was like, there's something about this middle book. It's not enough is going on. Like, there was not enough action, and there was a lot of things that didn't quite, gel with the momentum and whatnot. And it turns out that originally she had written 2 books.
Oh.
She had written 2 books, and she had submitted them, and the publishing company told her that, they're long, and you should, kind of spread it out over 3 books rather than just 2, which is unfortunate because the first one was just so mind-blowing. It was, I think the term paranormal fiction is just so wide, but there are these wonderful metaphysical aspects and so complex, and its own mythology, and it was amazing. And then we have this middle book, and I'm just like, what the hell is this? So, at least you're doing a service to readers by not dragging them through a 3rd book if you don't have enough to make a 3rd book out of.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you write a novel, the middle of the novel is always really hard because you're over that sort of excitement at the beginning and you haven't reached the excitement of the end yet. And so middles are really hard. So then if you look at 3 novels, that middle novel is going to be in that same spot. It's going to be really hard to keep things moving. So I just made it 2, and I'm happy with the 2. I have to thank you for scheduling this because I reread them, and I have not reread them for years. And it was really fun. I'd forgotten half of what happens in there, so I really enjoyed rereading them.
That's so cool. My feeling about books that, actually, first this was born out of necessity, which was I didn't have enough money to keep on buying more books. I hit the wall in terms of, I hear ya. And it's so easy because this is before, I got into the ebook land, and now I don't buy any books because all the books that I get are from publishers for me to review. I know, poor pitiful Liz. But before then, basically, I had all my books, and then I would just start reading through the ones that I liked a lot. And there's just so many different things that, called to me, and when you reread something so often, you pick up on these little gems, like the tree, where and the poetic language, period, when it comes to things that Lewis says. But that we have our weaknesses facing each other and our strengths on the outside, and then you have a literal tree in the book that is twisted together, and I'm getting goosebumps. and
you really are obsessed with this book. I love it.
I know. I am. I was like, oh. And she's like, when I realized I loved you, I thought of this tree, and I knew it was us. And I'm just like, oh. But let me tell you guys, I love romance, but I am not into mamby-pamby, soft and girly stuff. But I like when strong women have meaningful moments, and there are so many in here, and and there are so many great settings. When you were writing, how did you did you do planning or research, or how do you come up with the the locations, like the pond that they escape to is pretty darn awesome. It's like a little Shangri-La. And I was like, how does this all happen? Or is it just, your mind is populated with so many ideas and they just pour out and develop as they come out?
No. You kind of create as you need it. I needed them to have a place where they could go and be alone, so I created the pond. But the thing that was fun about the book is it's a quest. And my favorite movie is The Wizard of Oz, which is a quest. So the benefit of a quest is you could keep this person moving to different settings, and so you never really get bored with one setting. I'm not really good. I can't keep my characters in one place.
Uh-huh.
My writing just goes flat, and it's terrible. So the setting was already set up. I knew that she had to go to these cities based on the history, and it was fun to just keep her moving.
Mm.
And so I didn't know what I would need until I got to that point. I did sort of plan it out. This was the first thing I'd ever written that was long. Before that, all I did was children's books.
Oh, yeah.
4 pages. That's it. 4 pages of text. So I started putting scenes on Post-it notes.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really label them. I just wrote a little couple words, and then I put them on the back of my office door.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty soon I had the whole door covered with Post-its, and they were sort of organized by chapters, and it was a great tool for me, except this was before we had air conditioning, and Minnesota gets pretty humid in the summer, and I came down one morning, and all the Post-its had sort of given up, and they had fallen down, and they were in a pile on the floor. Yeah, that's what they said. I said something that you can't say on this show.
Oh, you can curse. Cursing is allowed.
I had to tape them all up again, and that, in a way, was kind of a good, exercise, because it made me go, okay, is this really going to work? So I had to sort of recreate it, and but I do like to plan. I need to know sort of where I'm going. I can't just sit down and write. Mm-hmm. I just envy people that can do that, but I can't.
Yeah, I find for myself, my saga has been the novel that I'm publishing in July.
Oh, good.
and I had first written it about 6 years ago, and my best friend Jackie, I had sent her a chapter, and she's like, "What happens next?" And so I was writing feverishly and sending it to her, and finished the first draft in a month. It wasn't terribly long. I picked it up, and then I put it down again, and I picked it up and I put it down again, and I had a lot of concerns regarding its marketability because it had a lot of violence in it, and I was like, and I loved my main character, but I didn't think my readers would love her because they wouldn't get it because of her behavior, and so I kept on trying to mold and reshape and fix. And as you know, as a writer, your voice changes as you mature.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I had this mess of different voices, and, you could really tell what I wrote 5 years ago and what I wrote recently. And it was a mess. And I was like, oh my God, this is hopeless. But I kept on, I was like, okay, I'm going to fix it by doing this. So in January, I worked on that, and then I sent it to somebody, and she's like, I don't like Charlie. I was like, oh, fuck.
Because people have to like the main character. It's so upsetting when they don't like them.
She's like, I don't like her. Her relationship seems superficial, and the cause and effect doesn't make sense. It's too, she's having these dark fantasies where she's doing things she would never do in real life, which is, she's a kind person. She would never be physical with anybody or harm them, but she thinks it's a guilty little pleasure to, create these different scenarios. And then it turns out that a dark dream master decided to take her ideas and make them reality, which includes, somebody ending up dead.
Mm.
And so she's like, even if that's what was going on, what she did to them doesn't make sense. And I was like, oh, crap. So And she also said, there's infidelity, and, you can't just have that as a reason, because she seemed like a nice enough person, even though the relationship wasn't working out. Charlie's wife had been cheating on her. I was like, oh my God. So I radically changed my plot. I pulled out all the infidelity, because in the beginning, you find out that Charlie's wife left her for somebody else. And then at the end, she's, manipulated into having an affair with somebody who's married. And so there's like all that kind of drama. And I was like, all right, I'm pulling it all out. And I lost about 80 pages.
Yeah, yeah. It's so hard, but we do have to listen. I mean, my friend was giving you some really important feedback. And I got that same feedback. I wrote a middle grade novel, which is for age 12-year-olds. And I sent it to my friend Pat. And she said, I don't like Taylor, the main character. So I did major revisions like 3 times. Finally, okay, I like her now. So then I sold it to a publisher, and the first thing the editor said is, now we have to work on the main character. I don't really like the main character. So,
ow,
it was so painful.
And you put so many hours into it, and I was like, but I love Charlie. People have to love her too. And then I went from having series of events that were, dramatic that she was involved with, to only one surviving it, and then a bunch of other things. And so my novel went from pretty heavy on the paranormal horror, to now it's really just a paranormal, supernatural thing novel. And Charlie's much more likable, and I cut down on the number of characters, because there are some people like, there are too many characters, I'm getting lost. What's happening between one of her friends can still happen between, the other. And I was just like, okay, I know you're right. Because if you ask somebody for their opinion and then you just do whatever you want to do, why did you ask them?
Yeah, exactly. Well, congratulations. It sounds like you made it through it. It's going to be a book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually like it, and it makes sense. And there's some really rad elements, including trees. And so many, and it's so funny. Once I changed things just kept on clicking. Like I was finding things like that I wasn't expecting while researching. And then my friend had this great dream. Like she's been under a lot of stress. She had this great dream that, there was this enormous tree. It was so big I couldn't even see around it. And I was climbing it, and it was like there was an abyss off to the side, but I wasn't afraid of it. It was fine. And I was like, that is such a rad concept. So then I wrote 2 short stories about that tree and 2 young girls, and then it turns out it fit in at the end of the novel when we were trying to get to a certain point. And I was just like, oh, and all the trees come together.
And I love stealing things from other people. That's what you
I did ask. I said, I know it's your dream. Would it be okay if I used it? And it was this perfect, segue, because we're trying to figure out how to get rid of somebody who was banished before but showed up again. And the key is figuring out, how did you do it the first time, and let's see how we can replicate it. And I was like, how am I going to lead up to it? How's it going to end? How's it going to come together? And then the tree sequence was a great segue into like what I needed to do in order to expose what happened. And then, everything crystallizes and everybody bands together and banishes evil and saves the day and all that kind of stuff. But it all came together in the last 3 weeks. It was very funny.
You got to trust the process, that it's somehow going to come together in time.
You hope. But, you have to have a lot of faith, I think.
Yeah, I've had some experiences where I figured things out just at the last minute. and so I've done that enough now that I figured out, okay, I just have to relax and sort of trust that the creative process is going to work, and I'm going to figure it out somehow, even though I can't see what it's going to be. So I guess you talked about maturing as a writer. I think I finally learned to just relax and say, okay, I'll figure it out somehow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I have an education background, and I come from so many teachers in my line. One of the unusual things of actually having a trade family. Mm-hmm. And so I have been cobbling together all these different methods of organizing my thoughts, like using graphic organizers. For those of you who are not teachers, it's like when you have like webbings, or the Venn diagram with the two circles intersecting, or just like all sorts of ways of organizing information. And doing free writes is where I got a lot of the backstory for my characters, and it's like in my head it's like this huge giant mess that I'm trying to put together, kind of like your post-its, and then it all coalesces into this abstract reality, and magically you have a book.
Yeah, it is magic.
I think so too. So I have some questions from one of my frequent listeners. Her name is Elaine Mulligan.
Oh, I know Elaine.
She's just wonderful.
Yes, she is.
And one of her questions was, what movies were your favorites when you were growing up?
Oh, I think I mentioned The Wizard of Oz.
Mm-hmm.
Just watched that once a year. It was on TV once a year, and now I tend to watch it once a year. I love that because it was a quest. She had to go somewhere. Another one of my favorite movies, which is not from my childhood, but The Abyss. Do you know The Abyss?
Mm-mm.
It's with Ed Harris, and it is just nonstop action. It taught me a lot about plot, because one thing goes wrong and then something else goes wrong, and each thing gets worse and worse and worse. And I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, I didn't know it was, I'm thinking back to Kate's quest, and I didn't know where it was going to go. And what I thought was interesting is she had, conceptually, like, if I, one thing after another, if I can just build these rocks high enough, then maybe eventually I'll get back to where I need to be.
That's the hardest part for me when I'm writing a novel, is getting inside the character's head and sort of coming up with those ideas and those thoughts that she's having. I'm pretty good at plotting and sort of, moving the character forward, but I really have to force myself to stop and say, okay, if I was Kate and I was in that moment, what would I be thinking? And so I'm glad I do it, but I really have to force myself to do it.
So, how did you come up with Walada? Is that how her name is pronounced?
I say Wayada, but
Wayada. Okay.
No. Almost all those characters are real people. Wayada was the daughter of a caliph. She was from that time period. She had male lovers, female lovers. There actually was a book written about her, and they said that they had a camel load of letters between Wayada and this woman lover that she had. So she was a real person. The Caliph in Zaragoza, he was a real person. I mean, most of the people there in the story were real people.
She also is like an interest, even though Kate is a very strong woman, she's in over her head in this time period. And it's because she's trusting people at their word. And it's gotten her in a lot of trouble, like starting with Godesto, who's like, oh my God, they've still kept you. That's terrible. You wouldn't have to do this if you were with Christians. I'll help you get out of here.
Yeah, some people have gotten frustrated with Kate because they can see her walking into trouble before she can. But I don't know, if I was back in that time, I would be so freaked out that I would miss a lot of the cues that maybe I would pick up in my own time. So I kind of feel it's believable that Kate is kind of stumbling around and making some mistakes, because it's so freaky to be back there.
Plus, she wanted, I was like, no, I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing that. She wanted it to be true. She thought she was having, because she was living in the harem, and dealing with a lot of what she considered backwards thinking that is traumatic for a lesbian feminist. So she's like, oh, well, Wayala is this, she's allowed to go around the way she wants, and maybe she'll actually help me. And, instead she doesn't realize that it's all a plan to get her in the sack, and that she's not going to help her ever.
Another reason I threw her in there is I like to not know who my main character is going to end up with. And so I thought, well, let's just put another woman in there and see if it makes people nervous.
And the other really neat thing is that it's making very much. Lewis is making her very uncomfortable because she thinks she's having these romantic and sexual feelings for a man, and it's just so messing with her head. And she's like, I haven't even been here this long. This doesn't make any sense. And why did his kiss make me feel that way? It's never even felt that way with Anna. And then I was like, well, maybe there's a magic little gaydar that figured out that you're having the hots for a woman, even though you don't experience her as one.
So did you know before you got to that part in the book?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't. And that's the ambiguity. I was like, oh my God. That's that's one of the reasons why I'm going to put a spoiler warning on the book. I really did not see that coming.
Good.
I did not see that being a woman. And so that surprised me a lot. And also, like, there's like a very serious conflict that I think is relatable, especially for people who are transgender or gender nonconforming, to read a character like Lewis, because even once it was discovered that Lewis was a woman, it didn't automatically transition into them having wild, crazy, monkey lesbian sex. It was actually a point of contention between the two of them.
Yeah, Louise had to stay in I don't want to say in costume, but his or her life depended upon remaining Louise. And in the book, he does mention what would happen if he was caught. And I did read in a history book. The reason I just love history, and so I love doing the research. And there was a couple, the woman who was, two women, and the woman who was wearing the skirt was, I think, punished and then let go, but the woman who was wearing the men's clothes was killed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was pretty serious back then. So you can't really take it out of context. You have to understand that in 1085, this is what Louise needed to do in order to survive.
Unfortunately, that kind of double standard is not so far behind us, and it still exists in things that have happened in the 20th and 21st century. One of the books that really made an impact on me was Stone Butch Blues, and one of the things in the 50s and 60s and whatnot, before Stonewall and the LGBT movement, when the gay bars were raided, like sometimes they left the femmes alone, but they often raped the butches to show them that they were women and should act like women and should not take on their clothing or take on their role.
Yeah. And some of that then leaked into sort of lesbian culture. I came out the end of the 70s and the early 80s, and I'd hang out, we'd have lesbian support groups, and that was the big thing. And you weren't allowed to wear pink. I mean, if anybody wore pink, you were just made fun of. So, we kind of adopted some of that mentality, and it wasn't until I was like 40 that I put on a pink shirt and I said, damn it, I look good in pink. I'm going to wear pink. I reclaimed my pinkness.
There was this movie that came out, I believe, in the 90s or early whatever we call them, millennial. And it was If These Walls Could Talk 2.
I missed that one.
Oh my God, you have to watch it. Like the one with Vanessa Redgrave is just heartbreaking, where she loses her partner. Her partner falls and it, ends up dying in the night, but they wouldn't let her visit because she was not a family member. So her wife died alone, and then she finds it. She's like, why didn't you tell me? And then the surviving relative decides to sell the house underneath her, even though they both paid it off together. So it was just this horrifying thing. So basically,
farther away from those stories.
Yeah, but it, like, If These Walls Could Talk, it's centered around the home. So first it was their home, and then the next time it was, I can't remember, it's the late 60s or early 70s, and there was a old school butch, even though she was a young woman, and she wore suits. She liked to have her hair slicked back. She liked her style. She rode a motorcycle. And, she was at the gay bar, and a lot of the gay bars at the time were very butch femme. And then 3 hippie chicks, college students, went there, and they were all, kind of making fun of those people who were dressed in, either as femmes or butches. And one of them actually finds interest with the butch. But they punish her and tease her like, "Oh, you're such a stiff," when she came over the house and they're trying to unbutton her shirt and unmuss her hair and like, "Don't you feel better?" And they like, try and undress her and make her wear like a peasant blouse and whatnot. And they were gender punishing her, for being that. And even in college, I was in college in the 90s, and if you could pass as straight, as in like have long hair like I did at the time and still do, then you're passing and you're not dedicated to your lesbianism.
Yeah.
So
there was a moment, because I reread both books to talk to you tonight. I reread The Crown of Valencia, and there was a moment where, toward the end, I don't want to, it's too complicated to go into the plot, but a moment where Louise and her men sort of accept who she is. Mm-hmm. And when I reread that, I thought, wow, I didn't know that I could write something so moving, because it really was moving. I was pretty stunned. But it felt good that she was now getting comfortable being a woman and still being a leader, because she had always been a leader of soldiers.
Yeah. The other less serious but more serious in another element is that they fall in love and realize at the end of the first book, and they start a life together, and they're living in bliss, and then Kate decides to go back to her time for a certain reason, and she ends up living her life for raising Arturo, and wears this necklace around her neck, and has the knife that was a wedding gift from Luis. And so she stopped living while she just like became full on mommy, and then went back and they saw each other again, and they were still, it was still breathtaking that they were together. But it was hard for me that they didn't magically get back together when they met again, and they were in conflict, and it didn't really look like they were ever going to get back on the same page. And I was like, oh fuck.
Well, the writer's job is to not give the reader what she wants. So you wanted them to get back together right away, and so my job was to make sure that they didn't.
And they really didn't.
Yeah, because that, you don't give the reader what they want until the very end, which sounds kind of cruel, but it's what it's about, It's creating tension and just making things worse until somehow, magically, everything comes together at the end.
Oof. Now, actually, the plot for Crown of Valencia is very, very complex. A lot of different things going on. And one of the interesting things is when she returns to that time in the past, she no longer is helpless. Like she took karate classes with her son, and she has a little moxie to come up with. And they're not obviously they don't teach martial arts to folks who are warriors in that time period. So she's shocked that I don't remember if she was.
His name is Raphael. I had so much fun with this goon. He would just keep showing up trying to take her prisoner, and she or Arturo would kick his butt, and I just had so much fun doing it. Because she was kind of incompetent in the first book, so it was nice to give her some skills in the second book, so she had a little more to work with.
And the other thing was interesting is we got to know Anna, her ex-partner, a lot better. And one of Anna's weaknesses was hubris. She felt that, the way that history unfolded, with Christians taking control and all the things that happened and that they lost in terms of culture, were terrible. And she was bent on changing that. In the end, she was changing things for the worse, because she thought, history should have worked out differently. And obviously the butterfly effect did not work out very well.
Yeah. I would imagine it would be tempting, but it was the wrong thing for her to do.
It was so dramatic, and the things that she brought back drugs like Viagra, and was manipulating. Like she's manipulating this king and doing all these really shady things, and she's the one who outs Louise.
Yes.
And because she's bitter, because she's like, oh, finally you're here, that's great, we can be together, and with all my cats and whatnot. And she's like, I don't even know who you are. And like, how could you be with somebody, how could you leave me for a man? And then she's like, oh, maybe this isn't a man, and I'm going to punish you, and I'm going to punish her too.
Yeah, it was complicated, but it was fun to make her the bad guy.
So, what do you enjoy? Do you spend time reading lesbian fiction?
I do. I don't read as much as I used to. I published with Bold Strokes, and for a long time, Bold Strokes was actually giving the authors copies of all the books that were being published, which was incredibly generous, and it was great. But of course, financially, that was just crazy. So now they do ebooks, and I just have fallen behind. But I try and read what I can. I'm a fan of Rachel Spangler, so I read hers and Georgia Beers. And
Oh yeah, by the way, I interviewed Rachel, and we were talking about Spanish Heart, and she said she wanted to go on a tour of Spain with you, but a literary tour, as in going to the different places that that happened in both of your books that are set in Spain.
Oh, that would be fun. My book is set in Zaragoza, and I've never been to Zaragoza. Never been. And so I was doing research, but this was in 1999, and the internet just was not as complete as it is now. So I really, it was hard. It was hard to sort of figure out what it looked like.
So I have a question. When you were writing the intro, did you end up going back again and planting that scene in the beginning when she's seeing modern Zaragoza and she goes into the small room that she ended up sharing with Luis?
Yes.
Was that something that got in after the fact, or something that happened when you first wrote it?
Something that I went back and added because I didn't know what the room looked like, and I didn't realize that there needed to be some way to identify a room that she was in the 21st century versus at the same room back in the 11th century. So I used a round window. But no, I had to do that a lot. I had to go back and say, oh, I got to put this in there. So there was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I loved it was the little details, including, she went in that room and she felt at peace, like her body and spirit knew that room, which kind of solidifies it that I don't know how the space-time continuum. But in the end, for all Luis's and what their lives were, that was the truest to her heart. Whereas like Anna, it's like they didn't even really get along very well. They didn't respect each other, and Anna kept on being quote unquote disappointed, like they were gonna translate a text from Latin to English, and then when she found out that Kate didn't know Latin, she wrote notes like liar, deceiver.
Yeah, I don't know much about relationships because I've had one very long one. Well, I've had a couple before then, but I do imagine that there are relationships where people don't necessarily like each other all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I was making it up, but I was hoping that it would feel true to somebody, that you can be in a relationship and sort of accept that it's not the best place for you, but you stay.
Yeah. The reason why I asked you is there are several books published by Bold Strokes where there are folks who are passing, and one of my favorite ones is Sword of the Guardian, which is by Mary Shannon.
Oh yes, I love that one.
Oh, it's delicious.
It's very good.
There is so much going on, and like the characters grow a lot. Like the princess, she turns into a better person through, I guess you would hope that everybody kind of grows a little bit in a book.
Yeah.
But that her guardian was a very good guardian, even though she got bent because she had a crush, and the guardian was like, no. And it's no, because I'm a chick, and your father would kill me, and the only reason why I'm alive and that my sisters are taken care of was so I can continue to look after you. So if I fail that, my sisters are dead. But she would leave notes in her sword or in her clothes or in her books, and it became this big thing about everybody knew that she had a crush and it wasn't working out.
Yeah. There are so many wonderful books now. When I was writing The Spanish Pearl, there really there were no adventure books that I could find about lesbians with lesbians in them, and so that's one of the reasons why I wrote it. But things have really changed. So there are romances and mysteries and adventures, and it's just such a rich choice now that we have.
If you were making a choice with your time, do you find yourself attracted to tumbling into worlds where we're the main characters in lesbian fiction, or reading mainstream fiction?
I'm kind of all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually tend to read a lot of nonfiction, but I do like a good escape story now and then. So, so I'll be watching your show for more recommendations.
Well, one author that I've had on, who she got published by a mainstream publisher, but she's got 3 books, and they're mysteries, and her name is Jessie Chandler.
Oh yes, I know Jessie.
Okay, she's wonderful.
Yes. Yes.
She's just a great human being, a wonderful writer, and she's got so much comedy. And the thing is, if you want to watch a character go through something, read her books, because she just as she said, keeps throwing trouble at them. And it's like there's so much peril, and just when you think she's squirmed out of one reality, one bad situation, she finds herself in a worse one.
Thank you. I'd forgotten. I read her first one, and then I just have not been keeping up. So I need to. She has 2 more after the first one.
3.
2 or 3. Okay.
I don't know if the 3rd one is out just yet, but the next 2 are there, and it's just you're like, oh my God, poor
there are
Shay.
So many women writing really excellent books. It's really fun to be part of it.
Oh yeah, it's exciting. And I think many new listeners, or people who are new to lesbian fiction, regardless of age, have walked into this, multi-leveled universe where there really are true genre writers, and lots of choices from established publishing houses, self-publishers, and whatnot. And they don't realize what it was like when it was hard to do certain things. Like, for example, it's like, how do you find a publisher in the 90s? How do you do research without having an internet that actually functions? Like, when I was in college, I graduated in 98, and there was so much junk up on websites, and a lot of it was self-serving or whatever, and I was trying to find good resources, and it was more harrowing to find them than to put the effort in. And now it's just this huge explosion of sources, and I can just, like I was in my novel, I was like, I wonder what would happen if this happened, or I need to know a little more about the mythology of this, and I type in a few words and go through search results, and magically I'm there.
It's so different. With the Spanish Pearl, I had to go to the library and sort of paw through the books and request make special requests and wait for them to come. So it was a much longer process. And it takes place in the Aljaferia, which is a Moorish palace. So in 1999, I got on the internet. I found this one little photograph of this palace. Mm-hmm. And the other day I did it, and I found hundreds of photographs, inside, outside, courtyard. It was just...
How do you manage to create such elaborate worlds with such little primary sources to lean back on?
Just reading. Plus, not many people know about 1085. If I was to write about World War II, you'd have to be very, very accurate, because so many people know about it. But 1085, I can kind of fudge things a little bit, because there aren't that many people who are familiar with that time period. But I tried really hard to be as accurate as I could. I just read a lot.
Yeah, I appreciated it because a lot of times, whether it's in your history classes or even watching the History Channel, you get these broad strokes of what has happened, and the Crusades and the conflicts, and all other things like the Spanish Inquisition and whatnot, and it's all kind of muddled. But I feel like the world that you created with research was complex, and it was human in a way, and humans are messy. So the black and white desire of Kate to know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys, and whose side should I be on? Because I have a feeling Lewis has to be one of the good guys. So yeah. No, I dig it, and what's exciting is that also, well, this was harder. When I was reading, I was like, what does that word mean? And you have Google Translate. I think like
Oh, Alzheimer's.
yeah.
Blue eyes, yes.
Yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, what is she saying?
Well, it was kind of hard to decide, but I wanted to put some sort of Arabic words in there,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't know Arabic, and so I found this dictionary from the 12th century, but it wasn't English to Arabic, it was Arabic, and not Farsi, I guess, to English. So I had to go through the whole dictionary looking for words that I might use.
Oh.
So it was just painful. But I hope that they didn't slow you down too much, because I tried to make it clear what they meant in the context.
No, I like them because there was another book that I read, and they had a Muslim character. And when they had written a love scene, she was calling out to Allah or, whatnot. And to me, it was just like cutting and pasting the translation of the English, oh God. And I was like, I have, and I had a friend of mine who we were very close in my early to mid 20s, and she's Egyptian. And she spoke Arabic, and she used terms of endearment with her lover. I was friends with both of them. So when I read that, I was like, that's not something that she would say. I've heard the little, obviously things can be said in the heat of passion, but there are also things that you say in the heat and passion that you'd also say in real life, like Habibi, like my love and whatnot. And so it helps when you have those little helpers. When you finally sent your book out to Bold Strokes, did you have somebody who was kind of like a content expert who could help you make sure that you were true to the time period?
I had a friend who had a friend who was kind of an expert in medieval times.
Mm-hmm.
She was really into reenactment, and she studied all this stuff. So I had her read it. I don't think she found anything that really stuck out as anachronism. But other than that, she's the only one I had that read it, because I didn't know anybody else who would, knew anything about 11th century Spain. So when Bold Strokes accepted it, then I really went back and sort of redid all my research to make sure that I was being accurate.
Well, you did a fantastic job with both books, and I didn't talk about I got so wrapped up in my little love fest talking about Spanish Pearl, but that's the whole reason why I had you on, because I wanted to talk about how much I love the book. So I was like, it was fantastic. You also have A Pirate's Heart. I think I'm correct about that one.
Yes.
And that was, something that would ping any librarian, like, you're stealing pages from ancient books. This is terrible.
Yeah, that was close to my heart, because I read about that. Just the thought of people stealing maps out of library books just it incensed me.
Well, in the beginning of your memoir, Hit by a Farm, you talk about how you spent your time, and you were definitely an indoor cat rather than an outdoor cat. And you spent your time in libraries, so I can see how that would ping you, especially since you had such a passion for going to the library.
I love to read about romance, and not romance, adventure, and I love to write adventure. I don't actually like to have adventures. I'm very happy staying home. It's warm, it's safe, and then I let my characters go on these crazy trips.
Oh, you do a wonderful job, and I really appreciate you coming on the show and letting me fawn all over you.
It was fun. Thank you. I'm so glad you liked the book.
I loved it. I loved it.